Caleb had lived alone on his ranch for years, away from the busy world, surrounded only by his cattle, horses, and the open sky. He was a man of few words, known for his quiet strength and ability to handle whatever challenges the Wild West threw at him. But on that particular morning, as the sun was rising and casting a golden glow over the land, Caleb was about to face something he could never have imagined. He had been riding out to check on his herd, a routine he followed every morning without fail. His horse, a sturdy mare named Daisy, moved at a steady pace along the rugged trails that wound through the mountains. Caleb had grown used to the quiet, the soft sound of hooves on dirt, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional distant call of a hawk or coyote. It was the life he had chosen, and he was content with it, until today. Rounding a bend in the trail, Caleb spotted something unusual, a figure lying motionless by the creek that ran through the valley. At first he thought it might be an animal, but as he drew closer he saw it was a woman. His heart skipped a beat. There were few people out here, and it wasn't often that Caleb encountered anyone on his land. He kicked Daisy into a gallop, riding toward the figure with a sense of urgency. When he reached her, he jumped off his horse, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. The woman was lying on her side, her body covered in dirt and her clothes torn. Blood stained her shirt, and an iron arrow was lodged deep in her chest, the metal gleaming ominously in the sunlight. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. She was still alive, though barely. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and her eyes fluttered open as she felt his presence. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words were weak, but there was a desperation in them that Caleb couldn't ignore. He knelt beside her, his mind racing. He had no idea who she was or how she had come to be in this state, but there was no time to waste. He had to act fast. Reaching down, Caleb carefully examined the arrow. It was deep, too deep. Removing it would cause even more pain, but it was the only way to stop the bleeding. The woman's hand weakly reached out, grabbing his arm. Don't touch it," she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. "It will kill me." Caleb's heart sank. She was right. Pulling the arrow out would be painful, but leaving it in could mean her death. He had seen enough wounds to know that, and he had a choice to make. But there was something in her eyes, something that made him pause. She wasn't just afraid of the pain, she was terrified of something else. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. I can't go back. You don't understand." Her words were choked with emotion, and Caleb could sense that whatever she was running from was far more dangerous than the wound in her chest. Caleb's brow furrowed in confusion, but he didn't have time to press her for answers. He had to save her first. He looked around quickly, scanning the area for any sign of danger. They were in the open, and if whoever had done this to her was still nearby, they would be exposed and vulnerable. "I'm not leaving you here," Caleb said firmly, his voice brokering no argument. He took a deep breath and, with great care, placed his hands on the arrow. "This is going to hurt, but I need you to hold on." With one swift motion, Caleb pulled the arrow from her chest. The woman cried out in pain, her body jerking as the metal came free. Caleb felt his own heart race at the sight of the blood that poured from the wound. But he didn't hesitate. He quickly pressed his shirt against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The woman's breathing was ragged now, and her eyes were glazed with pain. She didn't speak, but Caleb could see the fear in her eyes, and it made him question everything. Who was she? Why had she been attacked? And who was she afraid of? As the minutes ticked by, Caleb worked quickly, trying to stabilize her. He tore a piece of cloth from his jacket and tied it tightly around her chest, hoping it would stop the bleeding long enough for him to get her to safety. But just as he thought he had done all he could, something unexpected happened. The woman's body shifted suddenly, and Caleb felt a sharp pain in his side. He gasped, looking down in confusion. Blood began to soak through his shirt. The woman, in her weakened state, had somehow managed to cut him as she struggled. His hand instinctively went to the wound, and Caleb's face went pale as he realized that he was now bleeding as well. "Don't move," Caleb whispered, trying to keep calm despite the pain. "I've got to get us both to safety." The woman, still conscious but barely, looked up at him with wide eyes. "You're hurt too," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have helped me." Caleb shook his head. "I couldn't just leave you here to die," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm not leaving you alone." For the first time, the woman's lips trembled into a faint, grateful smile. But the smile was short-lived. Her eyes closed and her body went limp in his arms. Panic surged through Caleb as he realized she was losing consciousness. He quickly checked for a pulse. It was faint, but still there. Caleb lifted her carefully, his mind spinning. He had to get her to shelter somewhere safe. He wasn't sure where the people who had attacked her were, but they couldn't be far. He needed to move, and fast. He lifted the woman onto his horse, cradling her against him. As Daisy trotted forward, Caleb glanced over his shoulder, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and questions. He had no idea who this woman was, but there was something about her, something that told him he had to protect her at all costs. The trail ahead was uncertain, but Caleb knew that whatever danger was coming, they would face it together. The wind picked up and Caleb squinted against the sunlight, pushing forward. With each passing moment, the fear of the unknown grew, but so did his determination. He had saved her life for now, but the real challenge was just beginning. Caleb's horse Daisy trotted steadily along the winding path, but the journey felt endless. The wind bit at his skin and his side throbbed with pain from the shallow wound the woman had caused when she'd struggled. He glanced down at her, her head resting against his chest, her breath shallow but steady. His heart raced, not only from the pain in his side but also from the fear that she might slip away before he could find help. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Caleb knew that time was running out. His ranch wasn't far, but it was still a long ride. He had to get her somewhere safe. He cursed himself for not being better prepared. He never imagined he would be carrying a woman, injured and near death, much less one who seemed to be running from something far more dangerous than a mere arrow wound. The rancher shifted his weight, trying to ease the pain in his side. Every bump along the trail sent a sharp jolt through his body, and he gritted his teeth to keep from crying out. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. He had to stay strong for her, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the arrow, the way it had been lodged so deep in her chest, how it had come from a bow made of crude materials, nothing like the weapons Caleb was used to seeing. It was a sign of something bigger, something Caleb couldn't yet understand. The woman stirred in his arms, her eyelids fluttering as though she were trying to wake up. Caleb tightened his grip on her, careful not to jostle her too much. He knew she was still hanging on by a thread, but he couldn't let her slip away. "Not after everything. Are you awake?" he asked gently, his voice low and comforting, though a knot tightened in his stomach. She managed to open her eyes halfway, her gaze unfocused, but she was still alive. Her lips parted and her voice came out in a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the sound of the wind. "They'll come for me," she said, her words laced with fear. "They'll come for both of us." Caleb felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Whoever had done this to her was still out there, and he had no way of knowing how long they had before those people found them. He glanced around nervously. The land was empty for miles, but that didn't mean they were safe. He couldn't risk waiting for help to arrive. He had to get her to a safe place, and fast. "I'll protect you," Caleb promised, though even he wasn't sure if those words were enough. His mind raced as he considered his options. His ranch was the closest shelter, but it wasn't secure. He wasn't sure who might be out there watching, waiting for an opportunity. He couldn't afford to take any chances. The woman's eyes fluttered again, and she looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They won't stop. Not until they find me." Caleb was used to danger, but something about her words made him uneasy. Who was this woman, and why was she so terrified? The more he thought about it, the more questions flooded his mind. Who would hunt her down like this, and why? He shifted his weight on the horse, trying to push through the exhaustion creeping up on him. His side was still bleeding, and his body was beginning to feel the toll of the ride. But he couldn't afford to slow down. He had to keep moving. "We'll make it," Caleb said, more to himself than to her. He wasn't sure if he believed it, but he had to try. They reached the outskirts of his ranch as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Caleb guided Daisy toward a small secluded cabin tucked away behind a thicket of trees. It was a place he used for emergencies, a hidden spot far from the main house. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to keep them out of sight. As Caleb dismounted, he carefully lifted the woman into his arms again, his heart pounding as he carried her toward the cabin. He kicked open the door with his foot, his eyes scanning the room quickly to make sure it was empty. Satisfied, he set her down gently on the small bed in the corner and began to assess her injuries again. The woman's breathing was shallow, and her face was pale, Caleb reached for a cloth and began to clean the wound on her chest, pressing the cloth to the blood-stained area as gently as he could. Her eyes fluttered open once more, and she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You've already helped me more than anyone ever has. Just leave me. You'll be safer without me." Caleb paused, looking at her with a steady gaze. "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. "You're not alone." Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned her face away as though ashamed of her vulnerability. Caleb could see the pain in her expression, but there was something else there too, something he couldn't quite place. It was as if she was holding on to something, some secret she couldn't share. He didn't push her for answers, though. She had already been through enough. After a few moments, Caleb stood and turned to the small stove in the corner, trying to get a fire started. The room was cold, and he knew they both needed warmth. As the fire crackled to life, Caleb looked back at the woman, his thoughts swirling. He had saved her life, but he had no idea what to do next. Whoever was hunting her down was still out there, and Caleb couldn't ignore the sense of danger that hung in the air. He needed to find out more. He needed to understand who they were dealing with. But first, he needed to take care of her, make sure she was stable before they could figure out what came next. The woman's voice broke through his thoughts, soft and strained. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "For everything. You don't even know who I am." Caleb smiled faintly, trying to reassure her. "Doesn't matter. What matters is that you're safe now." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I don't know how long that's going to last. They'll find me. They always do." The fear in her voice was undeniable. Caleb wasn't sure what kind of enemies she had, but he knew one thing for sure. Whoever they were dangerous. And Caleb would protect her, even if it meant facing whatever danger they brought with them. The night settled in around them, the shadows deepening as the fire in the stove cast flickering light on the walls. Caleb sat down beside the woman, his mind still racing. There was no way of knowing what would come next, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let her face it alone. As the night wore on, Caleb kept watch, his thoughts lingering on the woman's quiet words. He had no idea what he was getting into, but he knew he wasn't going to let her down. Whatever danger was waiting for them, they would face it together. And for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt something he hadn't in years: hope.